Welcome to episode 100 of Project Geekology. 100 episodes. We've had our highs and our lows, but we have made it to 100 episodes. I am one half of your host, Anthony, and joining me as always is...
Dakota and Anthony. We've had our highs and lows. What is this, a high or a low?
This is a high because, look, we've made it to 100 episodes. When did you say... At what episode count did you say that podcasts usually end?
I think the average podcast, if I remember correctly, is it ends after about 7 episodes. So I think we've passed that quite a bit. But yeah, 100 episodes. It's crazy. We haven't gotten paid yet. Like when is the paycheck coming in?
I'm gonna call it in. You know.
You gotta call him in. Anthony, we're joined by a special guest this week. He's a fan of the show. He's been listening to us for a while. He gave us the idea for this podcast series that we're going to be covering starting this episode. Guys, meet Rich.
Hey guys, Anthony, Dakota, thanks for having me. Really excited to be on the show. Ready to talk about some Rings of Power over here. And, finally, I'm glad I get to celebrate on such a momentous occasion with you guys.
Yes.
Nice.
Like Rich said, we are covering Rings of Power. We're going to be setting it up into... Each season is going to be set up into 2 episodes. We're going to cover the first 4 episodes in episode 1, and then the last 4 episodes in episode 2. And that's going to be the same thing for season 2. So just to kind of break it up, give us a little bit more time to really talk about and dive into the series. Because Dakota and I, we kind of talked about it. We thought that a series like this, and even series in the future, they deserve more than just like a 1-hour episode to cover it.
And I think we kind of realized that specifically when we covered Shogun,
yes,
that we just didn't have enough time to dive into the meat of the series because it was such an impressive work. And I think moving forward, this is probably, unless it's like a 6-episode series or a mini-series or whatever, breaking series into chunks while we discuss it will probably better our discussion and allow us to talk about individual topics a little bit more. So I'm excited about the prospect. And for those of you who don't know, we've covered Lord of the Rings topics in the past. We have a 6-episode series on the extended edition Lord of the Rings films that's literally as long as the extended edition films. That was way before we had like episode caps and all that, but that's a really fun listen. Rich, did you ever get to listen to this?
Yeah, I love those. I there's nothing like, my wife was complaining, but she's like, I don't understand how you can listen to a podcast that's almost as long as the original work or possibly longer sometimes. And that's just how it is, that's how it be.
That's how it is. There's more to talk about in a film like Lord of the Rings than it actually shows us on screen, which is surprising because it's such a long film. But I'm hoping that we don't fall into the same trap with the Rings of Power because, we have capped ourselves at around an hour per episode at this point. So we're going to get into the meat of the Rings of Power very soon. But before we begin, Rich, what have you been up to this past week?
I was talking to you guys a little bit about before we started the show. I've been working on a little project. So in 1999, when the Mets made it to the playoffs, the radio Z100 here in New York released a song called Who Let the Mets Out, which was a parody of the Baja Men's classic Who Let the Dogs Out.
Classic.
So this one was interspersed with different clips of the Mets being, like successful moments throughout the season. So
it was like a video thing.
No, so it actually came out, I think they had a video, but it came out as like audio on the radio.
Oh, I see.
So you would just hear like the music under like, oh, doggy, I have a bone, and while you hear like Mike Piazza hitting a home run.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got you.
So
okay, cool.
I did it about 10 years ago. I did an update version, and then my son has been begging me to do, he's 9. He got into the Mets this year, went to like 40 games.
Oh
so he
God.
asked me, can you do this?
You're crazy.
Yeah. So it took a long time.
40 games.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But it's worth it because now on the way to the games, we'd listen to Who Let the Mets Out with the updated roster. So it also drills all the players into his head. It's just like,
okay.
It's like passive mind control, really.
It's definitely propaganda of the highest order, but I love it. Yeah. Wow. There is no Warren Bossing say. Guys, Anthony, what have you been up to?
Well, I have been kind of like having a bit of a staycation. I took this week off. I know that I was just on vacation visiting family up in Tennessee, but now this week I'm kind of hanging out and having a staycation and taking care of things at home. And it was actually like
a vacation from your vacation.
Exactly, and then I had like a transition period where I worked like a week and then went back on vacation. But
take that time off, brother.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm using my PTO and it doesn't move over to the next year, so it's kind of like a use it or lose it. So I'm using it. And you know what was really cool on the day of recording is that Warcraft had their 30th anniversary direct. And so I kind of looked a little bit into that. They announced the next expansion for that whole saga that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so the next expansion that they're doing is called World of Warcraft Midnight. And that one's actually adding player homes. So I guess you can like set up like a home now in WoW.
Wait. Hold up. They, like a year ago, they announced 3 expansions. Is this part of
Yes.
that? Okay, this is one of those.
So this is the second of those.
And they're adding player homes.
Yes.
Okay, so you get to like Animal Crossing it a little bit.
Yeah, I get to set up a home and stuff. I wonder how, they didn't go too much into detail about it, but they told like, hey, you're going to be able to kind of set up a home. And I guess this is like something that a lot of people have been asking about. They also announced that I know that you and I were talking about World of Warcraft Classic and like how far they're going. They're going to go into Mists of Pandaria.
I don't think that's classic WoW, personally.
I personally don't think. I think that I think that Cataclysm and On is like kind of modern day WoW.
I think
so,
past Wrath of the Lich King, like that's it.
Yeah, you're right.
That's it. That's classic WoW.
So
anyway, who am I?
I think
Blizzard needs their money.
I think that they also said something about some of the servers in WoW Classic are going to be moving over to. They're gonna like shift over to become Burning Crusade Classic. So they're like doing more. They're like setting up more servers so that they can like just continue to like move to the future. I don't know what they're doing, man. It's so crazy.
Yeah, I'm a little confused, but that's, cool for people who are actively not playing current WoW, but are looking to relive the glory days of Mists of Pandaria. I'm happy for you guys. Or Burning Crusade, whatever. Very cool. What else have you been up to, if anything?
So, also, another thing that dropped is they brought back Overwatch 1.0. So the day that Overwatch 1 came out, they released the 1.0 like day one game.
Sick.
Yeah,
so I can play Hanzo with his scatter shot again?
Yes. Hanzo with the scatter shot, with the original.
Those were the days, dude.
It's the original 4 roles. They remember there used to be a defense role in the game, and like you could pick like 6 Winstons or 6 Torbjorns and stuff.
Yeah, I remember those days. I was getting like 17 to 20 kills per game just with scatter shot alone. It was amazing. It was beautiful.
So it's both fun and a little frustrating at the same time because the game is completely different. The game back then was more team based. Now you can do a little bit more like solo. You can carry a little bit more. Like if you're a really good player, you can carry a bit more. But like in that game, dude, you can't dive into a team by yourself or you're just gonna get melted. And I went back and I started playing characters that I never played when the game first came out. Like I was mostly just like a Lucio one trick, and then I played a little bit of Junkrat, and so it's weird like seeing how those characters operated like back then, or like I would mess around with them a little bit, but I never like played them too much. And it's so weird like the way that Diva plays, and then Symmetra being the support Symmetra again, and her having that whole teleport thing, and then Mercy having her mass res, dude.
I forget she doesn't have mass res anymore. Yeah, it's crazy how much they buff and like change characters over time, just like tweak characters slowly until they're completely different like playstyles.
Yeah, it went from like being a team-based MOBA type game to like this like 5v5 kind of brawl it out sometimes, a game mode where like you could have one person that takes down like 2 to 3 people if like you're skilled enough. But yeah, so I've been messing around with that. Like that, it's been interesting going back in time and doing that, and just kind of like enjoying some time off. How about you, Dakota? Have you been working on any of your projects? I know that you finished your OSHA 30. Was it OSHA 30, right?
I did. I finished my OSHA 30. It was a nightmare. It took literally 30 hours. Then I had to take a whole bunch of other little stuff after that I'm pretty much done with. But yeah, so as far as like actual work goes, I'm doing pretty good with that. You guys want to hear a theory that I've concocted for the Avatar universe? Like specifically the Last Airbender universe?
Yeah.
Tell us.
So, all right. So this, how do I say it? This is something that I'm not going to like broadly talk about online, but considering our audience probably won't bleed into the Avatar fan base, I don't think this theory is going to go anywhere, but I will discuss it when I release my big Avatar timeline because it has a lot to do with the origins of the world as it is, basically. So do you guys remember, I'm guessing both of you have seen Legend of Korra?
Yes.
And you remember the 2 episode where they go into the first Avatar, Wan, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So that's a pretty big moment in the show where it kind of discusses how the Avatar, like Rava, met with this character named Wan and eventually had to combine forces to defeat Vatu, the spirit of chaos and evil and darkness and stuff. But what I found was interesting in that episode, I went back to it because I was looking specifically to see if they had shown a map of the world. Because you probably have seen it plenty of times. You probably don't remember it off the top of your head, but the map of Avatar is very specific. You know, there's the mainland on the top right. There's the north and the south poles that are separated from the mainland. There's a series of islands to the west that make up the Fire Islands. And then, you know, the air temples are north, south, east, and west. So I was wondering if they had shown or showcased the map of the Avatar world up until that point. And I watched both episodes and I realized, no, they didn't. And the reason I wondered this was because in my head, I was thinking, well, there's this new video game coming out of Avatar 3,000 years after the first Avatar. Avatar 1, and it's supposed to take place during a great ice age where there's a lot of seismic activity. And I'm wondering, well, maybe this is how the Fire Islands come to be. Maybe the Fire Islands didn't exist in like Avatar 1's era. And I think there's actually more to it than just that. So I started like watching the episode and like getting some details down. And this is a time period where all humans live on the backs of lion turtles. So they don't have need for boats. And if you watch those episodes, there are no boats in the entirety of the 2 episodes, not even in like the war montages that occur at the end of the episode that showcase what the 4 nations are like warring over that eventually kills Wan. So there's no boats at this time period, but there is the moment where Wan travels with Rava to the South Portal, which is in the South Pole. Yeah. So there are no boats in this universe, but they somehow travel on the back of, you know, Wan's spirit animal or like animal guide without a boat. And I wonder if this is almost like a Pangea event where like the entire world exists in this huge continent at this time period. And then this game that's coming out in a couple years that's tentatively called Ice Wars, which discusses ice ages, which discusses seismic activity, or if that's the separation of the world. Because there's no other way for, you know, Wan and Rava to have reached the South Pole unless it was connected to the mainland. Unless I just caught a big plot hole and I'm just like connecting crazy dots. That's my current theory, is that like the game that's coming out, the AAA game, in a couple years is going to involve some sort of ice age that's brought upon by tectonic shift. And I'm really excited about seeing if I'm right about that.
That's awesome.
The creator is going to listen to this podcast and be like, you're not supposed to think of these things.
Have they announced that the game is... Have they done stuff like that where the game is canon?
Oh, it's canon. Yeah, it's not only being produced in that universe, but it's being funded by Paramount and Avatar Studios. And it's like they're spending the majority of their like budget in terms of gaming on this like IP. So as far as like canon within the Avatar Legends universe, it's pretty succinct. They like almost everything is hard canon up to this point. There's comics, there's novels, and there's a tabletop RPG that has added plenty to the canon. So I don't have any like reason to believe that this isn't supposed to be canon.
That's going to be really awesome. I'm looking forward to that.
Nice.
It's like the Jedi games. I love that those have become canon in the Star Wars universe.
Cool. Yeah. So with that out of the way, I'm sorry for the tangent. For those of you who haven't seen any Avatar or Legend of Korra, that probably made no sense to you. But hopefully our topic at hand will make sense to you. We're discussing the first 4 episodes in no particular order of the Rings of Power. So I guess before we do any of the individual spoilery thoughts on these episodes, how about we discuss the show as we're approaching it as a whole? So we'll start with you, Rich. You were talking a little bit about your experience with the Rings of Power and how you felt coming back into the series, before we started this podcast.
Yeah, so as I was saying before, it's weird because I've now rewatched things way too many times. So I watched it once, and then before the second season came out, I watched the first season again. I kind of had the same feelings about it. I'm not really that well versed in the Silmarillion. I didn't know a lot of the characters. I'd heard of Númenor. I like how they roll their R's, but I didn't really know much about
I like that
anyone
too.
there, and it just felt like there were almost too many characters for me to kind of attach to any of them. Then I watched the second season, and I really liked the second season. And then I went back when I found out the great news that had be coming on the show. I went back to rewatch the first four to make sure I could separate everything in my head. And I like it so much more. I don't know if it's just going in with more knowledge into it. I mean, I'm somebody who forces my son to do a full extended rewatch in one day and have meals punctuated along the day to make sure I bribe him into staying into it. So I do remember when the Two Towers came out around Christmas, all the way back in 2000 whatever, because I'm ancient. I had convinced my friends that we
remember that too. Anthony, I remember
Dakota and I, we saw those in the movie theater.
We were children, but we saw
it was Christmas Eve. My friends and I are all hanging out. We're older. And I was like, so we're going to still go see Lord of the Rings, right? And they're like, no, man, there's like 4 feet of snow. And I was like, forget you guys. And I walked all the way there and watched it anyway. So I've been a fan of, I read the books. I read The Hobbit. But Silmarillion was the only one I didn't really have a lot of knowledge about, and I felt a little lost. So I don't know. I mean, as a teacher, I tell my students you have to reread all the time. I'm telling you, the rewatch, it changed my perspective on it completely.
Excellent. Anthony, what were your thoughts going back into these 4 episodes?
It was interesting because you can see the setup for a lot of these characters that you eventually see down the line, like the Harfoot, like you can tell that those are ancestors of hobbits,
Right.
And a lot of these characters, you were talking about Númenor, which eventually goes on along the lines that's the line that Aragorn is a part of. He's one of the Dunedain, which is part of that kingdom. And so it's really cool seeing the past. And there's certain characters that I had seen also like that were like in Shadow of Mordor. Celebrimbor, dude, his name is
Celebrimbor.
Yes. Like he's the main character of that game. Mm-hmm. And so it's weird seeing him in this light as kind of like a little bit into like politics. Elrond, he didn't surprise me at all. Like he's always been kind of like a politician, and that's how he was shown throughout the Lord of the Rings. But seeing the setup of these characters from like down the line, Galadriel also, and like her kind of having like this warrior background, and then what she like eventually becomes in Lord of the Rings. So it's interesting seeing these characters years and years before.
Yeah, I had a similar experience as both of you. When this was first coming out, this was also coming out at the same time as House of the Dragon, HBO's House of the Dragon. And for me, that was the far superior show. It was just like week in, week out, I was just floored by House of the Dragon and just a little bit perplexed by Rings of Power. And eventually I dropped off after episode 5 of Rings of Power. Not because I didn't like it. It just wasn't grabbing me. And I think I don't really remember what I was doing at that point, but it just didn't feel like it was worth my time up until that point. Going into the series, I was very excited though, and I think that was what really was the big issue, was that it didn't meet the excitement that I had going into the series, because I do read a lot of Tolkien. So, Rich, you were saying you hadn't read the Silmarillion. I have read the Silmarillion. This has nothing to do with Silmarillion. This is like even deeper than the Silmarillion. Oh. This is the appendices of Lord of the Rings. This is the history of Middle-earth, which was like released by his son Christopher like years after his death, in a series of like just annotated notes of Tolkien that he had written over the course of like 40 years or so. Which is a really cool thing, but I've never even touched it. I haven't gone into any of that. So this was all new to me for the most part. I had, bare bones ideas of like what Númenor was all about and Galadriel's story going from, the first age into the second age and into the present of Lord of the Rings. But while I wasn't hugely in tune with where these stories were coming from or where they were being sourced from, I was understanding of the fact that they were truncating the second age of Middle Earth into this storyline. And I think that bothered me to some extent. It doesn't really bother me anymore, but at the time when this was coming out, it was just like at the back of my head, like, man, I know this isn't Tolkien lore, even though I personally didn't know the Tolkien lore to that extent. So it kind of bothered me a little bit, and that's why I dropped off. I'm really excited to, give this series another shot. And watching these 4 episodes was really exciting for me because, without the baggage of when it was coming out and all that, it was really cool to be able to just experience it with fresh eyes. And yeah, I think I got a lot more out of it this time than I did in the past.
No, I totally agree. And the thing is that you kind of have to watch this series in a different light than like Lord of the Rings. Growing up just watching Lord of the Rings over and over like throughout the years, it really has become one of those, like, it's like a sacred trilogy, and anything that falls short of that quality is like kind of like ugh, and the thing is that there are elements and aspects of The Hobbit that I do enjoy, but it doesn't really come close in terms of quality to me. And so
right. If you rewatch the Lord of the Rings series, are you also going to rewatch the Hobbit trilogy?
No, man. When I say I'm doing a Lord of the Rings rewatch, I'm just watching those 3.
I know people who do watch The Hobbit.
do.
I'm like, why bother?
I do.
Oh, okay. You're that guy.
I'm here for the content. Like, just give it to me. I don't care. Put it in my veins. That's all I want.
Okay. All right. That's fair. Fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't argue with that.
If you enjoy it, and like I said, there are aspects of it that I also enjoy. It's just there's certain things that I wasn't a big fan of, but like you can tell that with Rings of Power that there is an attempt to try to stray away from some of the things that stumbled The Hobbit a little bit, and show that they're trying not to overuse CG too much. I mean, obviously they use it. There's a lot that needs to be done, like with CG. It would just cost way too much to like do without. But you can see a lot of the practical effects and the practical scenes, and I really do like appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, going into this, I was kind of floored by how much I forgot about how good this show looks. It looks beautiful. Like literally every shot is just like, wow, I can use that as a wallpaper. Yeah. Wow, I wouldn't mind, just being there, like,
dude,
wow,
that shot of Númenor, like when they were coming up on the ship,
first time,
like, was beautiful.
Yeah, no, it was really cool. There's a lot of just real strong, solid beauty in this series, whether it comes to, even like from like the first age, like when they're introducing Galadriel as a kid and seeing the trees that are glowing, that are providing the light for the elves and all that. It's just gorgeous, and you could tell that they did their homework. Like, it's impossible to watch this show and be like, these guys don't know anything about Tolkien, which you will hear a lot of online. So it's amazing what they were able to accomplish. But I want to talk a little bit about the music, because there's a lot of musical cues in this that I'm just like, this is really powerful. And it's musical cues that I remember from my one viewing of the first 5 episodes. I think that's all I made it through. That, Galadriel's theme, the da-na-na-na-na, na 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 na. It's just like so powerful, and it plays all the time. But there's not even like the only one. Like, there's plenty of music that just really rings true, and it feels Lord of the Rings it feels like the Howard Shore score from the 6 movies that exist, and that's really cool. And I think it was Bear McCreary that did the music for this. He's done a lot of like really cool stuff in like the geek community. I believe he did some of the music for God of War. I think he did music for Godzilla, King of the Monsters. He's done some really cool stuff.
Hey man, we've had that a few times with some of the geeky things that we've covered, that like Howard Shore like had like a staple kind of in Lord of the Rings, but then like you also had like John Williams, that he had a staple in Star Wars, but then you also had a really good score in The Mandalorian, and that was not John Williams.
Right, that was
Ludwig Göransson.
Ludwig Göransson. Yeah. Göransson is a prodigy, honestly. Like, everything he touches is gold. But what's amazing about Mandalorian is that it sounds good, but it doesn't sound necessarily like John Williams. It doesn't sound John Williams-y. And that's what makes Ludwig's work on The Mandalorian and other shows around it as so cool, because it doesn't need to rely on John Williams. But I think what I like about the Rings of Power is that it sounds very Howard Shore-y. Like, it sounds very Lord of the Ringsy, and you could even be confused as like confusing some of the themes in the show for stuff that could appear in the movies, and I think that is so powerful.
I thought it was the same guy, so I don't actually track a lot of this stuff just because of the style. I actually thought
you just assumed,
if
right?
Have been, if I would have been in like Cash Cab, and it would have been like a true or false question. I would have bet yeah, no, it's Howard Shore, true, and then he would have been like, sorry, and the lights go down.
Sucks to suck, sir. Yeah. So that the beauty of the show, both visually and musically, is something that just beyond any criticism past that point is just flooring. It's, you talk about like the money spent, and Amazon notably spent a lot of money on this show. I think it was like over the course of 5 seasons, they were, willing to spend like $500 million or something, like $500 million on this show. And if you break that down, that's about as much money as they probably spent on the first season of The Acolyte. And I'm a fan of The Acolyte, but this is like leagues above The Acolyte in terms of just like the visualization and stuff like that. So it's amazing what they were able to accomplish here. Let's talk a little bit about like characters and some of the different story threads that haven't necessarily coalesced yet, but we can kind of see a picture forming. Let's start with Galadriel. What are your thoughts on Galadriel, guys?
She's interesting, like coming into this, I wasn't too sure like how I was gonna feel, because like I've seen how she is in Lord of the Rings, and so she's so much different in Rings of Power. She's portrayed to be a lot younger, and she's got a lot more impatience, and she is like battle-hardened, and so it's really interesting to see how she is. And then if like throughout the series we're going to start seeing her develop a little bit more into, or we're going to start seeing glimpses of the Galadriel that we see in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so like the Galadriel that you're talking about is specifically like she's a queen, but she's also like known as being a witch of the forest. And she kind of exemplifies both of those things in, just her like extreme royal manner, but also in the fact that like she's able to get into the fellowship's head and all that. And, she's telling them glimpses of their future and like discerning things of their heart that she can't currently do in Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. At least we don't know that she can. So I think that is a really, it's going to be interesting seeing how that develops. But we see that Galadriel is almost like a warrior, like she's, like you said, she's battle-hardened. She's been fighting this fight for presumably hundreds of years. She's been searching for any hint of Sauron, because she knows deep in her heart that Sauron's not gone. He's in hiding somehow. And even like the other elves in her party, like they're ready to give up the hunt because there's been no, sign of Sauron for ages.
Right.
No sign of orcs in years.
Yeah.
Rich, what do you think of Galadriel and her story arc over the course of these first couple episodes?
Like Anthony was saying, I kind of know her more as the woods elf witch, like and her power there, and even she's briefly in parts of The Hobbit. The White Council, I think, is meeting there, and even there, she's not, pardon the pun, but regarding this first arc, it's very like Joan of Arc showing up, and I didn't see that coming, to be honest. I didn't know that she was going to be, I basically know from like the movies and my one read of the book, but I didn't go deep into any appendices or anything, so I didn't know this side of her. I will say that I guess I kind of understand the other elves saying that, they think she's a little kooky for still believing that Sauron's out there. But I don't know, maybe it's just, I don't think it's just the knowledge of knowing. I just think like, they all know Sauron is a bad dude, he's hanging out with Morgoth over there, and that's not a good dude either. And I'm just surprised that they're all so quick. And maybe it's because, obviously, a conceit of the show, right? They have to tell us this quickly. They have to exposition this. So
okay.
We go into it, and if you kind of think about it, like all of the Lord of the Rings media we've seen, you go into it, and you're like, yeah, I know there's a Sauron. So there's like one character who right away is like, hey, guys, I'm pretty sure Sauron's still alive. And everyone else is like, nope, can't believe it. And I think as the viewer, I know I'm supposed to forget that he exists because I know what happens after, but it makes the other characters look more like buffoons, and it makes her look less petulant, you know. But at first, like, she's coming off as very, very petulant and very impatient, as Anthony said. But I agree with her, you know. It's like she's acting like a jerk, but I'm like, no, I get it. I mean, she's right, you know.
Yeah, with
I
the
guess,
meta knowledge, you're like, no, listen to her.
Yeah, exactly. Guys,
Right.
come on, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at it as like in the real world, if there's just a guy with like, you know, his contingent of troops trekking through the Adirondacks saying, you know, I know the British are still coming. I know that they're coming. And it's been like hundreds of years. Like it's
Fair.
The British are coming.
That's kind of what I like. I mean, it's funny. The same logic can be used for, like, you know, going back to like the Acolyte for a brief moment. The same, you know, everyone's like, well, obviously, like, it was a red lightsaber guy. Like, a bunch of Jedi are killed. It must be the Sith. But like, Sith haven't existed for what, 900 years at that point. That's like saying the Vikings are coming. Like,
Fair.
they're making a return.
So yeah, I can see why some of the soldiers in her retinue are just like eager to be done with this. And obviously there's a huge reward waiting for them back at home because they're going back to their homeland. And
Yeah.
it's a really, really cool scene. When Galadriel capitulates, she goes back to Lindon. Lindon is the elf city that we're visiting here. And the king grants them the opportunity to journey off back where they came from. And it's a really cool visual thing. Like, I didn't know how they were going to manage it, but it's just like the absence of substance as they're just drifting off into the east and just seeing like the clouds and the sky part to just like this heavenly glow. It's like literally pearly gates for them. And they're all just like on the cusp of that portal into whatever is left, like past Middle Earth. And Galadriel, she just cannot do it. She can't make herself leave at this point. And I think that that's such a cool thing. And she jumps ship and, you know, eventually it lands in like on a raft with Halbrand and all that. And I think that that is a really interesting little arc. And I think that that's partly like where I lost the plot a little bit past that point, because I wasn't a huge fan of Númenor specifically, or like the politics and like the goings on of the people of Númenor at that point when I first watched the series. What are your thoughts on Númenor and like the people in the city?
I didn't. So I'll be honest with you. I couldn't understand. I mean, it became obvious that it was elves versus humans, and there's kind of a sentiment rising here.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think you're right. I think what happened was I was just trying to wrap my brain around this idea that, you know, Galadriel is supposed to be kind of off her rocker, and she's believing in something that doesn't make sense anymore. She jumps off, gets onto the raft, and now instead of like going back and dealing with her stuff, then we go off to Númenor. And I was like, well, what's going on here? So I this is when I think the B plot, or whatever you want to call it, coming in here like so quickly intertwining, I think it would have benefited a little bit. Again, if you're a little bit more uninformed, I think that if you spent a little bit more time with Galadriel's reaction there, I understand that Númenor ends up becoming a way for her to get where she needs to be, but I was a little confused. Pharazôn has fantastic hair, I will say, so I loved that, and that's
The speaker guy, right?
Yeah, Muriel's cousin.
Pharazôn or Pharazôn,
Yeah,
something like
Pharazôn.
that. Yeah, and he always has this like extremely cocky grin on his
Yes.
face, and it's like lifting up his beard. It's like it's great hair, very punchable face.
Oh, he's very the one thing that there's no getting around is he's very, you know, immediately like almost vaudevillian bad guy, you know.
Yeah, I personally, I haven't really seen much past this point, so I don't know if he's a good guy or not. I just know that he is a current antagonist of Galadriel, so he's a bad guy to me, you know? But then so is the Queen of Númenor, so, you know, and then there's that whole plot. But let's not get too bogged down. Anthony, you haven't mentioned your thoughts on Númenor before we jump away from it.
Númenor, so it was interesting. The city was beautiful. Like, honestly, like, the actual space was amazing. But it was really cool with some of the people that were introduced. I mean, dude, a huge character in the Lord of the Rings universe was introduced in
That's
Isildur. So, and we know his story.
We know his story.
It's
we
all
know how
his
it
fault,
ends
dude. Like, Lord of the
specifically.
Rings would not have happened if he would have tossed that ring into the fire, you know? So,
Right.
things are his fault, man.
Things are afoot, and it's mostly Isildur's fault. And, you know, a lot of things are Isildur's fault because, you know, he's like in the naval, I don't know what it is. It's like a naval academy sort of thing that he's trying to...
Yeah.
The Sea Guard. Okay, yes. And he is like, what is he even like longing for? Is he longing for his home back in Númenor, or is he's longing to go to Middle Earth? What is his goal? I don't know. Like, he keeps getting like daydreams while he's doing something extremely important, and it ends up costing like him and his friends like a position on the ship that they were, you know, at least his friends were trying to get on for like their entire lives. So it's interesting. Rich, you're being very quiet, so I'm assuming we're entering spoiler territory, and I don't want to know what happens past that point. So
I'll keep it safe. I'll keep it secret.
Yeah,
I appreciate
next
that.
week we'll talk about the latter half of the season.
Yeah, whenever you guys say something that I'm just gonna say, I'll keep it safe. I'll keep it secret.
I like that. Okay, I do like most of the cast that they introduced in Númenor. I think they were interesting enough, if not just extremely one-sided characters. And I think that is also like a turnoff for me in some ways. But like, they all seem like I'm supposed to be like the smart father character, or like the wise father character. I'm supposed to be the scholarly daughter character. So you get a lot of like characters. I'm excited to see how they get entwined in the overall plot with Halbrand and Galadriel and all that going forward. But we'll talk about that in a future episode. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the Southlands. What are the characters' names? I don't even remember.
There's Bronwyn.
Bronwyn is the
woman with the dark hair. Her son is Theo.
Yeah.
Right.
And Aronadir, I think, is the elf.
Arondir.
Yeah, Arondir is the elf. And, you know, the cool thing about the Southlands is that, you know, a lot of stuff that we talk about is going to obviously trickle into Lord of the Rings territories. But it's interesting, like, what the Southlands are. Like, what it is, what it becomes. It becomes Mordor, dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
that was a really interesting. That was a really interesting little
right?
like detour they took when they were in Númenor. They went to like the Library of Lore or something like that, and they matched up this symbol that Galadriel had been seeing for who knows how long, like in regards to Sauron, with the, you know, the shape of the mountain range that will eventually become Mordor.
Right, it's like a beacon of
Southlands.
sorts. Like, go there, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
like, if you're evil, we got a spot for you.
over
we got
there.
prime real estate.
Yeah, so yeah, it's interesting. It's like, wow, you know, because we know what Mordor looks like in Lord of the Rings. It's, you know, devoid of grass and trees. It's all ash and all burnt up. But like, this is like the grasslands. It almost looks like Rohan, you know?
An interesting choice that they had specifically with, you know, the orcs that were inhabiting like the underground area of the Southlands is that
we're not racist here. Is Uruks.
I thought the Uruks were later.
No, you're thinking of the Uruk-hai. The orcs in this series get offended if you call them orcs. It's like a pejorative term, and they're just the Uruks.
Okay, very very interesting. I don't think have they gotten offended thus far? I must have, unless that happens later.
You gotcha, man. You gotcha.
Okay. All right. So the Uruks.
Thank you. I don't like for that kind of talk on the podcast. So this is a 100 episode, Dakota. Like, put, you know, what if we have our audience is listening right now? They're going to be very offended by what you just said.
They're going to be very turned off. You know, just sitting there in their like darkness, just like brooding.
And their tunnels that they're digging.
Yeah, meat's off the menu, boys.
I thought that was interesting. That the way for them to avoid sunlight is like digging underground, and then
that was cool.
And like tunneling under people's homes, and then like kidnapping them and making them dig. Dude, that's insane.
Yeah, what's really funny is that kind of happened in Brooklyn recently. Like not Uruks, but it's something that actually happened. Like, it's a real thing that happened in Brooklyn recently, where a Hasidic Jewish community decided that, you know, like, I guess they were breaking off from their temple, so they were their own space underneath Brooklyn, and it was a crazy story. And I remember there was like a guy online who like for like a year was saying that there's Jews under his floorboard, like speaking in Hebrew. And and nobody believed him. They thought that he was just being a racist, but like that was actually something that was happening.
He thought that some Borat thing was being.
So
Dude, I have to look the story up.
It's real.
Because that sounds hilarious.
It happened like within the past year. It's the funniest story.
You must have died laughing when you found out about that.
Yeah, no, there's like footage. It's crazy. It's like it's really funny. Like it's just a wild thing that happened. So that was in the back of my head when Theo was saying that there's mice in the floor and he starts attacking the floor.
So like somebody's sitting there trying to put their kids to bed in the Southlands, and they hear the black speech under the floorboards.
Yeah. Oh, those mice are talking again. Oh man. But I do think that was really cool. I thought that the way that they portrayed the Uruks at this point was just fascinating, and I liked that they couldn't get into sunlight. I thought, like giving them like vampire powers and like weaknesses was kind of fun.
Right. Well, and they've always kind of
shied away,
right? I think it was the Urukai that were the only ones that could kind of run out in the daylight.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. So that was kind of the whole... Yeah, that's why the Fellowship was like so surprised that they were being chased by Orc, was because they're not supposed to be, So that was cool. So seeing that in this episode was really interesting. And we have... So Arondir and Bronwyn have this like unspoken relationship where they just meet up every now and then. And, Arondir, an elf, Bronwyn, just a female human of presumably low birth, like she's just in a village, she's not of any particular royal line or anything like that. It's a very interesting dynamic to have developed. And obviously Bronwyn and Theo are like chastised within town because of her relationship to the pointy ear, as they call him, like they like to, throw the derogatory marks at the elves and stuff because they've basically been occupying the land ever since they were, faithful to Sauron back in the day.
That their like ancestors were pretty much, they had sided with Sauron, Morgoth. That was, so like that bothered the humans. They're like, why are you guys still here? Why are you watching over us? Like that was so long ago. And in a way, like he's kind of right. The blood of their ancestors still kind of run through their veins.
There's a scene in the final episode that we are going to cover today where, what's the guy's name? Waldron, I think, was like the innkeeper. He is very clearly still loyal to Sauron. And it's almost like you think of like the Nazis that fled to Argentina and, South America. You still have people who are totally, still Nazis, and they're totally okay with it. And they like to look back at the glory days of their ancestors who moved to the country. And I kind of felt the same vibe was being introduced with these people who are still at least quietly faithful to Sauron and his Uruks at this point, right? Like, did you get a similar vibe to that? Is that what I'm supposed to be, kind of attributing that to?
It seems that the thing I find that to be interesting is the townsfolk are we're supposed to see them as closed-minded. We're not even supposed to kind of see their way. Like, they immediately come off as kind of like racist towards elf and closed-minded. The elves don't present to be like some sort of police state where like the villagers can't do as they please. It's just like the elves are there just making sure nothing happens. I don't think they're rounding anybody up. The Southlanders do seem like destitute. I don't know if Waldron is loyal to Sauron or knows that they're destitute and not doing well. And if they pledge to Sauron, then they can get out of this. It's like if a group of people openly picked somebody who was terrible to be a leader just because they thought he would get him out of something. I think that's the point.
No, it never happens in real life. Never happens in real life. But I do like the analogy there, and I appreciate that fantasy and science fiction is able to kind of like shine a mirror on history and on present events and current events in ways that aren't super in your face. But if you like dig deep into them, it kind of explores how people think and how people react when pushed against a wall. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. What do you think about the, I guess, star-crossed love affair, or not like really affair, but like love of Bronwyn and Arondir? Like, what does he see in her? What does she see in him?
Is it possible? Go ahead, Anthony.
I was gonna say, like, there was obviously something that was already established kind of there when we first meet them, you know? And so there's a lot that we just don't know about, like, their relationship. Obviously, you know, he's been around, and so maybe there were some pleasantries over time, like, you know, they got to talk and got to know each other, and then, you know, a relationship kind of blossomed from that. But other than that, you know, there's not much to go off of other than like some of the stuff that we have seen. Like, he came back and he saved Bronwyn and Theo from these orcs that were chasing chasing Theo, and then she comes to help, and then like he kind of like helps save them both
Yeah.
from them. So
That was such a cool scene. I had to like rewind it because I was just like amazed at like the slow motion action in that scene where like he pushes Theo, he sees an arrow coming in slow motion, he catches it and then notches it and shoots it right back. Blowed my mind. I had to rewind and just like
that was very much so like a Legolas thing that you would see.
Yes, and I think that was like stuff like that is what made Legolas my favorite character back when, you know, Lord of the Rings was a thing. And that's why like for the longest time I was always playing like rangers and hunters and characters like Hanzo in Overwatch who had a bow. Like I'm just drawn to that. Like as soon as I see a bow, I'm just like, that's me.
You're drawn to a bow.
I'm drawn to a bow.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I see what you did there. I see what you
Drawn.
did there. Also, I think that Bronwyn is just, you know, she's a single mother, but she's also extremely well-spoken. She's like a powerful woman who doesn't like take crap from anyone. And I think that he really respects that, you know, despite all of the shortcomings that were laid upon her, she's like a strong woman.
Yeah. Aside from her, like, obviously being poor, like, she's still like well kept, you know, like she's not really all that unkempt, you know.
Oh yeah, no, she's a beautiful lady. We can say that. But yeah. So speaking of strong women, we should head over to Durin and his wife and the Elrond story that is quite interesting. We have Celebrimbor introduced to Elrond early on, and he is tasked to help create a great forge, which, you know, I can only assume what they forge in this great forge, but I'm assuming it goes on fingers. So a lot of anticipation going into whatever Celebrimbor's got up his sleeve. It makes me think, like, how did he come to this idea to create this forge? Is he being manipulated behind the scenes? Are a bunch of people being subtly manipulated to an end that Sauron is eventually going to, like, you know, hold over them? I don't know. I've not watched past episode 5 of the first season at this point, and I only rewatched up until episode 4 this time around. But I did really, really love Elrond's relationship with the prince of the Dwarven nation, Durin. What are your guys' thoughts on that? And, like, you know, him having to, like, show his worth to his friend who he hasn't seen in 20 years.
Yeah, and, you know, I just thought that was so interesting that, you know, Durin is right. Like, 20 years is a long time, and it may not be much time to an elf, but for a lot of us, like, dude, like, for a human, even dwarves, I know they live longer, but, like, not as long as an elf does. But, dude, like, 20 years, like, that's not pocket change, like, to an elf. Like, it's like, dude, you didn't even come to see me. And the man got married, the man has kids, and, like, Elrond wasn't there. So he was very much so, like, he was in the right to be upset with Elrond. And I mean, come on, dude, like, you know, dwarves, especially in the Lord of the Rings universe, like, they're stubborn people. And, like, when you're on their bad side, like, you really gotta work to get on their good side.
As an old dude who's coughing right now because I'm old, I just want you to know, I kind of took Elrond's side here. You know, I get it. I'm the elder statesman on this. There are times where I'll see a friend who lives not that far, and I'll be like, hey, it's crazy that we haven't seen each other in 14 months. So I felt Elrond's side. I felt attacked by Durin. I was like, yeah, I've missed stuff. All right, buddy. We're old now. This is what happens, right? You know, you call...
Yeah, we're not in high school
now. You
anymore.
call your friend 3 or 4 days after their birthday, and that's acceptable.
Well, I think it depends on how, like, strong that relationship was. Like, I feel like it's okay if it's, like, you know, maybe a friend, but, like, not somebody super close. But, like, you know, like, being married and having kids is definitely, like, something huge in like, people's lives. And so if you see somebody that, you deem as a really close friend that doesn't even like reach out, then like I would feel some type of way, like, okay, well, does this person not want me in their lives anymore? And then you also have to understand that he knew that Elrond was there for more than just the reason to catch up with old friends, and so he felt that, and so that kind of was like, that was like insult to injury. Like, okay, well, you're showing up here out of nowhere.
Like,
you haven't
you
even
want
seen
something from
you
me.
want
Yeah.
something from me, but you don't even have like, you weren't even there for important parts of my life. But then you want this.
My question is, did Durin send an invite? Because that's a big, like, how was I supposed to know? I haven't seen you in 20 years. I didn't know you got married. Like, come on.
I mean, I guess with the suspension of disbelief, possibly,
I'd like to imagine
it was on
getting an invite from.
It was a stone. It was on like a stone tablet. Like they like chipped it out and they like sent it. I liked the tree that he had there.
Yeah, he gave him the tree.
Oh, yeah, like the sapling that he had given Elrond, or he had given Durin years ago.
Yeah.
That he had grown even in the dark. That was cool.
But it shows like how much that friendship meant a lot to him, because his wife was like, he treats it like it's his third child.
And what's cool is that he doesn't have like a heavily adorned home. So that is like a statement piece. Like, it's a huge statement piece. One corner of his house is just this massive tree. So it obviously means a lot to him. And he thinks about this Elrond guy every day, and he's always talking to his wife Disa about how much he misses this guy, and he doesn't show up.
I like when they were talking about the story of like how they met, or like how Elrond had saved him, but Durin said that he had saved Elrond. So yeah, that like little jab and back and forth that they had and their friendship was really fun. I actually did like that friendship a lot. It's just like two completely different people, and they kind of like saw through their differences and established something really special.
What are your thoughts on Disa? I think the idea of someone singing to the mountain to like almost pray to it, which I guess it's a really fascinating idea, a notion, because like dwarves live their entire lives within stone. So obviously they would make that their gods in a way,
Yeah.
So being able to communicate with the mountains and express that in interesting ways, I thought that was really cool. And that kind of ties into like the intro of the show itself, like the actual cinematic introduction that they play before every episode.
Oh, yeah.
You have, I don't know if that there's like an actual term for it. I'm sure there is, but certain vibrations, certain harmonic frequencies, like develop different patterns in sand. And this is like an actual phenomenon. Like if you get like a square plate and you play different rhythms or different frequencies, the different frequencies will come up with different geometric shapes within the sand. And that's what was happening in the introduction to this show. And I think that has something to do with what Disa's up to in terms of like being able to harmonically resonate with the mountain itself. I think that that's just a cool concept. And I don't know if they're going to explore that at all, but it's something that's always fascinated me. Rich, do you have something to say?
Upset that the Disa doesn't have a beard? If I remember correctly, Gimli said that, there are dwarf women, but that since they have beards, they're not often recognized. And this dwarf woman was very clean shaven.
Well, I mean, she does have like stubble under her like jowls, like not necessarily like a beard, but like there's a little bit of like they definitely
maybe she shaved. They
perhaps,
they
perhaps she's
shave. All right, or like a Brazilian wax or something every once in a while.
She's
probably not
shaver,
like Brazilian,
sure.
like Rohirrim wax or Númenorian wax, something like that.
Right? Yeah. Give me the Balrog wax, please.
Well, that one's hot. You gotta be careful.
Too deep and too greedy. It's interesting. Like you never really think about like when they first discover a new ore, like Mithril.
Yeah.
But you could tell immediately, like when they opened the chest, and they didn't show it to the audience, but you knew what it was. Like, what else are the dwarves mining at this point?
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool knowing that this was a unique thing that they had just discovered. Elrond doesn't even know it exists at this point. But yeah, I like that too. I thought that was really cool. And I really like the secrecy that Durin like requests of Elrond. I don't know if Elrond's going to keep it. I assume he's a stand-up guy. I wouldn't put it past him to keep it, but I think someone else is going to find out about it. I think Celebrimbor is going to find this ore, hanging out in his belongings, and like, I'm going to use this to make a ring, a very special ring. So might happen. Rich, don't tell me if it does, but
Keep it safe. Keep it secret.
he's gonna keep it safe. He's gonna keep it secret. We're gonna touch on this later.
Also, so now, we're coming up on an hour and 10 minutes as of recording. So we talked a little bit about that. I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to say, but we have a whole other side of the story that we haven't even touched on, which is
The Harfoots.
yes.
The Harfoots and that crazy guy that falls out of the sky. I like aspects of what they're doing with the Harfoots. Like, there are like interesting qualities that are very, Hobbit centric.
Yes.
That they exhibit. They're very nomadic people. They hide away from men and stuff. But
They don't like adventures, and like there's always there's always some hobbit out there, or some Harfoot hobbit, that wants to do something. They want to go out and adventure, and Nori is definitely one of those, inquisitive types that wants to like know more and wants to see what things are about.
I love that her name is, so she's Brandy Foot, and I wonder if at some point like there becomes a loose relation to Mary in some way. Isn't he like Brandy Buck?
Oh yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that like their names are all very similar. So I'm assuming these families will, intermix at some point and like spread out. But we know that hobbits in the Lord of the Rings era are very stuck in wherever they are, in Hobbiton and the Shire. Like they've made that their home. They live there. There's no adventuring past that point. They don't go on, caravans and stuff. But the Harfoots in this era are nomadic. They don't have a home. They're constantly on the move. And I think that's kind of cool. What do you guys think?
I like that they sound Irish.
Yeah.
So they have a very like Irish accent, and like there's
they
some people that have like
that
Scottish
Irish brogue.
accents, and then like British accents and stuff. It's so like you can tell that like all of this takes place in some European type land.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I wonder, they do have different accents, some of them. Some have more of a Scottish brogue than like a British accent and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if there are different collections of Harfoots that exist in the world that, they travel with each other, they kind of break off and they go their own route, and these different parties collect in different areas as they are, they're nomads. So it'll be interesting to see where they land. Eventually they're going to have to settle down into the Shire and, the rivers of that area. So yeah, because, prior to them becoming Shire folk, or hobbits specifically, they're gonna end up becoming they'll land on wherever Smeagol and his friend were. They were Smeagol and Deagle.
It really is.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. What do you guys? All right, one thing that I particularly did not like, and I guess it makes sense for them, but there's one scene that like I really cringe at. It's like something like, we walk in a line and nobody gets left behind. We walk in line, nobody gets left behind. And it's like the wheels on the bus go round and round.
That's the Cub Scout chant,
Their little mantra, dude. I rolled my eyes, and I think I rolled it last time I saw it. I don't know why, and I'm thinking about it. I'm like, this is very much like something a hobbit would do, but like I feel like hobbits would have a little bit more colloquial, prowess with their words. Like Bilbo was very like eloquent in his delivery of lines. And but I guess not all hobbits were.
I mean, but dude, like, look, they're living in Hobbiton.
Yeah.
They're in the Shire. They're a lot more established. So I'm pretty sure that they have stuff established. These people are very nomadic. They're very like, they're living this like, kind of gypsy lifestyle, and yeah, like moving along.
You can't look for good poetry from the hunter-gatherer, civilizations. You have to wait till they become agrarian before the beauty and splendor of the hills and the flowers really starts rolling out in their art.
Okay, that's words of wisdom. I will allow the Harfoots to develop as the series goes on, but I do like them for the most part. I really like Nori, and I really like Nori's friends, their little relationship.
Poppy?
It's very Frodo and Sam. Yeah, Poppy. It's very Frodo and Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. And like they're very like, curious, and like that like I want to kind of like see what's going on here, because like I mean they go and check to see the man that falls out of the sky, the stranger.
Yeah. So, Rich, please don't tell us who the stranger is, because I actually don't know. Still, I have my suspicions, but I don't know for certain.
Yeah, I haven't looked
If you know,
myself,
or
but yeah, I have my suspicions too.
I'll keep it safe. Keep
I,
it
I
secret.
know, I know about like Sauron, that was all over the internet. I'm not gonna talk about it here, but I don't know about the stranger. So I'm interested to see like what they do with that, because it's obvious that he was one of the Valar or the Maiar, basically like angels of Eru Ilúvatar, who was sent to Middle Earth to basically guide the people. So I'm guessing he's one of the five wizards at the very least.
Yeah.
He exhibits some characteristics that Gandalf also exhibited, like he speaks to insects. He is obviously very close to hobbits and like little folk, like that's like very Gandalf.
I was thinking that same thing. They probably have already named whoever the stranger is. At this point, Dakota and I are just speculating. So
Yeah.
we know that there's the rest of season 1 and the entirety of season 2. So we're coming at this with like fresh eyes. So we're covering it as we're watching it. And so, but yeah, no, I totally agree. And it for me, it's like, makes sense because he has such a good relationship with the hobbits and the Lord of the Rings that it's almost like this is where that love of the Shire folk and stuff would be like, I came here and they helped me. They were the first ones there to help me.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that is
See?
a very strong point towards the Gandalf line of thought. But, he could be Radagast. It would be an interesting twist of fate if he turned out to be Saruman. But I'd also like to meet the two other wizards that are never named, at least to my knowledge, in Tolkien's work, the Blue Wizards. So I don't know. I'm most curious about the stranger when it comes to the Rings of Power right now.
The one thing
Rich is in the background, like dying because he probably knows the answer.
The only thing I will say is that, like, I think that you have, and this is why I talked about how, like, after Where I Am and then going back and watching it, I appreciate the show so much more. It's just you get like smacked with what in the first 4 episodes easily. I mean, if I say 40 characters, I don't think I'm far off. You have, 3 to 4 different locations. And then you have 2 mysteries. Who is this guy and who is that guy? And I just think that it was really ambitious. And I think it can easily turn people off if they don't really want to get into it. I think that's why maybe, look, I was watching House of the Dragon at the same time, and because I'm a slave to routine, kept watching Rings of Power no matter what. But I was enjoying House of the Dragon much more in that first season, and even the first half of the first season, comparing both of them, there was no comparison. And, I enjoy, give me everything, give me dragons, give me magic. I love all that stuff, and I can like it in different ways. But I do think that, like, what they were doing here was just super ambitious and creating so much kind of confusion that it was a little jarring, unless you're kind of really locked, as the kids say now, locked in, LMAO,
Yeah, for real.
But yeah, you're definitely right. And it's the way that like society is kind of like with the growth of the internet and stuff, like we really want to know like the answers to things almost right away. Whereas like, dude, like we watched like an entire series that was comprised of like one giant mystery and then several smaller mysteries in Lost, and and so like we didn't care about it, but it's like now it kind of like bothers us, like, oh my gosh, they didn't explain this, they didn't explain that. Well, maybe at some point they will, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Speaking of which, there's like a little anecdotal thing that Jen and I, my wife, experienced where we were watching Parks and Rec, and one of the characters says, he's talking about Twin Peaks, and he has a line where he says, I was rewatching the end of Twin Peaks and it all makes sense, it all comes together. I don't know how they did it, but it all comes together. And I was like, I should really watch Twin Peaks. I've never watched Twin Peaks before. So my wife and I, we watched the first, I think it was 2 seasons of Twin Peaks, and nothing was answered. It had the biggest cliffhanger I've ever experienced in a TV show, and then the show was canceled. And it's the craziest, like, non-ending of all time. And I thought that was just such a I know this is like really off on a tangent, but I thought it was such a funny like gag on Parks and Rec's behalf to trick me into watching Twin Peaks so that I would be confused as the writers who were who were clearly let down by Twin Peaks. But anyway, I hope that does not happen with Lord of the Rings: The Rings of Power. But I think we're gonna close out our first episode there, unless we have anything else to say. Any final thoughts on the first 4 episodes, guys?
I mean, so far I have been enjoying it a lot more this like kind of second time. I stopped around the same point that you stopped. I think I stopped at 4. So the next like few episodes are gonna be like things that I haven't seen at all.
Totally fresh.
Yeah.
Nice. Rich?
I'm really enjoying it. The rewatch is super fun. I obviously need to slow down a little bit. So my apologies on that one, but I'm really enjoying it. I'm telling you, like, for me going back to it, it reminds me of when I started reading Game of Thrones. I think I got 80 pages in and I just got overwhelmed. So I watched half of the season, maybe like, I watched about half the season, and I was able to then put faces to all the characters, and then I went back to the book, and then I was able to really take off. And it's almost like getting, and you know what? I think it's a gamble, because I think that modern audiences, like you were saying, Anthony, are so impatient. They just want to know everything right away, and perhaps we're conditioned that way, myself included, to the point where now I'm sitting at a point where I'm excited to hear what you guys are going to say. I'm really excited for you guys to watch it. You know, like, I want to end this episode and be like, no, guys, but really, like, go binge it now, you know, because I want to get into everything. So I appreciate you guys having me on for this monumental episode. It's
absolutely.
It's been a blast.
Yes. Yeah. Episode 100, you know.
We did it.
You know,
this is actually the last episode, guys. Thank you all for listening.
It's like Walking Dead. By the way,
leaving it on a Rings of Power cliffhanger.
That would be like,
and just like Twin Peaks.
I was gonna say Twin Peaks style.
It's canceled.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to us here for our 100th episode of Project Geekology. Please be sure to give this episode a review if you are capable of doing so. And specifically, if you're going to give us a review, you're going to have to give us, I think it was 3 stars, Anthony?
Oh, man. Never. It's got to be 5, but not just any old 5 stars. It's got to be a juicy 5-star review. You know, type some stuff if it allows you. If not, don't worry about it. But as long as it's a juicy 5-star review, it bumps us up in the algorithm and brings in more listeners.
Think about, you know, the tomato that guy bit into in Lord of the Rings, and that's the juice that we're talking about here. It's got to be 5 stars, guys.
Are you talking about Denethor?
When Denethor, like during that song that Pippin's singing. Good times. Guys, if you want to check out any of our socials, please be sure to visit the show notes down below. You'll find all of our locations. Rich will also link you if you'd like.
Sure.
And you can go ahead and follow Rich and see his Mets escapades because he's got a lot of Mets escapades. A lot of them. Guys, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Bye, y'all.